Our next speaker is Dr. Nicholas Diakopoulos. Nicholas Diakopoulos is an associate professor in communication studies and computer science at Northwestern University, United States, where he is director of the Computational Journalism Lab, CJL, and the director of graduate studies for the Technology and Social Behavior PhD program. Diakopoulos' research is in computational journalism with active research projects on algorithmic accountability and transparency, automation and algorithms in news production, and social media in news contexts. Together with the team of Washington Post, Diakopoulos developed a news discovery tool for the US 2020 presidential elections. Their goal was to use a data set of a few 100 million registered voters across the US to try and find interesting locations where a political journalist might go in order to discover a demographic trend in the electorate. He is the author of the award-winning book, Automating the News: How Algorithms Are Rewriting the Media, from Harvard University Press. Title of the session is Making Automation, Algorithm and AI Work for Journalism. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you so much, Manju. Really appreciate that very generous introduction. And I'm excited to be here today to share with you some of my research on this topic. I guess I should go ahead and share my slides at this point. Okay. And I can give a little bit of a presentation.
Okay.
Are we good there?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Again, I'm Nick Diakopoulos. I'm a professor of communication studies and computer science at Northwestern University. I run the computational journalism lab there. We study, we design, we build technologies related to computational, algorithmic, automated, and AI-driven journalism. So I'm gonna kind of jump right in here and talk about the book a little bit. So this is my book, Automating the News: How Algorithms Are Rewriting the Media. And I spent the better part of the last couple of years writing this book on these various topics. It covers, everything from how to data mine large data sets to find new stories, how to automatically generate content, whether written or other forms of media, the use of social bots to disseminate information or interact and engage with people on social media, algorithms and distribution. So all of the optimization algorithms, all of the curation algorithms that we see in our feeds and on our home pages every day. And then also kind of flipping things around and thinking about how the growth of AI in society has created a new beat, really, a new opportunity for journalists to investigate algorithms, investigate AI, and scrutinize the ways in which algorithms and AI influence us and exert power over us. I think you'll see if you read the book, it really emphasizes a very human-centered approach towards the future of technology and journalism. So I like showing this slide, kind of get this out of the way. AI is, I think, fairly hyped right now, or actually I could add an animation there and maybe it's even more hyped now. We've certainly seen a lot of exciting advances in technology. Fully automated news production is tantalizing without a doubt. And there are some genuinely impressive and helpful applications of AI in news production. We should celebrate those. It can enhance investigative journalism with machine learning. We can create new interactive media like news bots. We can optimize content for distribution. And we can generally enhance the scale and the speed, the efficiency, and the breadth and personalization of content that we can produce. But I think it's important to emphasize the people. You know, behind the curtain of AI, we really kind of need to understand the designers, the editors, the reporters, the data scientists, the engineers, who are all contributing in their own ways to the appearance of intelligence in these systems. And I think once we sort of cut through the AI hype, we can start to see some of the human aspects and the people in the process a little bit more clearly. And so to do that, in particular today, I want to talk about a couple of the main themes of my book. The first is editorial values in AI technology. And the second is how humans and algorithms are increasingly hybridized in news production. So in terms of news values, you know, all technologies, including and probably especially AI technologies, embed and encode human values. They reflect choices like the data that was used to train the system, how the data was defined and sampled, how algorithms are parameterized and defaults are chosen, what inputs a system even pays attention to, and of course, you know, whether some aspects of the world are quantified while perhaps other aspects of the world are left unquantified. I think it's important to remember that AI systems are tools. They're built by people to serve particular human means and ends. You know, we're not talking about artificial general intelligence here. And because of that, these tools have political valence. They reflect the values that designers and developers build into them. I think this suggests an interesting opportunity for journalists and for news organizations to become better aware of and exercise their ability to embed their own organizational, institutional, and professional values into the technologies that then drive news production. You know, if it's not going to be journalistic values and journalistic ideology, then alternative values from non-editorial stakeholders or non-journalistic media companies and platforms will end up filling that void. And so when I talk to practitioners about this topic, I tend to emphasize that you can think of AI as a new medium. It's a medium in which journalists can express and exercise their ethical and normative values through the code that they implement, the tools that they create. Now, so the second theme here is hybridization. So every wave of new technology, whether it's telephony, photography, or just copy machines, has somehow changed the nature of roles, of tasks, and workflows in the newsroom. AI is really no different in that regard. It's also a technology. It has already and will continue to change news work, and it often complements but rarely entirely substitutes for a trained journalist. So some economists have actually estimated that only about 15% of a reporter's job and maybe only about 9% of an editor's job could be automated using current levels of AI technology. Humans still have an edge over non-Hollywood AI in two key areas that are essential to journalism: complex communication and expert thinking. So things like reporting, listening, responding and pushing back, negotiating with sources, and then having the creativity to put that all together. AI can't do any of these sort of indispensable journalistic tasks, though it can often augment human work to make it more efficient or high quality. More often than not, what I've found in my research is that AI technologies tend to create new types of work, like having to configure, parameterize, set up, create knowledge management systems, create data, define data, collect data, write templates, and generally set up and operate these automated systems. So far from destroying jobs in journalism, what I found is that AI actually appears to be creating new work and new jobs. So let me drill into these themes a little bit more and give you some examples. So this is one example that I think illustrates the first theme of values, human values in AI, and in particular news values. So what I'm showing here is the Claimbuster project. Claimbuster is a tool that was developed at the University of Texas at Arlington. And what it does is it's a machine learning tool, and it learns to look at sentences in a text and rate those sentences on a scale from 0 to 1 according to how worthy they are of having a fact check made to them. And so you can see this in this example. I ran it on an older speech from 2016 here. So journalists can use this tool to identify claims that are being made in the media that might be worthy of their attention in fact checking. And so by orienting their attention and shaping the attention of journalists, this can reduce the costs of finding certain types of claims so that they can follow up on them. And so, these data mining algorithms like Claimbuster may end up influencing what facts get checked. And in turn, that could shape the news that's available for public consumption. So let me show you a little bit of an evaluation of Claimbuster now. So in this chart, I'm showing you this evaluation done by the creators of Claimbuster, where they compared claims identified by the algorithm to claims that were manually selected for fact checking by CNN and PolitiFact. And so you can see CNN is in the medium gray and PolitiFact is in the light gray. The findings showed that Claimbuster identified more claims about the economy and fewer claims about social issues. So if reporters were to solely rely on Claimbuster to identify and guide their attention towards these check-worthy factual claims, this could end up decreasing the attention that fact checkers give to social issues. And this is an outcome that we may not think is desirable from a public interest standpoint. Another Claimbuster evaluation that was done on 21 transcripts from the US presidential debates in 2016 showed that Donald Trump had fewer check-worthy factual claims identified by the algorithm in comparison to Clinton. And this sort of suggests that Trump's rhetoric and his mode of communication may have made his statements less susceptible to being highlighted by the algorithm. So as these automated fact spotting techniques become adopted in practice, I think an important question will be to assess how they impact the coverage of various types of stories, various claims, events, and modes of political rhetoric. Journalists are going to need to become more cognizant of the ways that these algorithms orient or divert their attention in characteristic ways, and the people need to be ready to fill in the gaps as needed. So to understand the limitations of the tool. So let me go a little bit further here. I should add that it's not just fact spotting systems where this matters. There's an increasing number of tools used for computational news discovery within newsrooms, not to mention the variety of algorithms which shape the distribution of news. And these approaches raise interesting questions about how algorithms embed evaluative and normative criteria like newsworthiness, and how they come to shape the editorial attention of journalists or of the public. So, what is selected to become news is contingent on a range of individual, organizational, social, normative, economic, and technical forces. Different criteria are important to different journalists in different combinations or at different times. And so I think it's interesting that newsworthy isn't really an intrinsic property. It's very contextual, it's interpretive, and it may even be story specific. And so I think it's an exciting research challenge here is going to be to develop algorithms that are sensitive to all these contextual variations and configurable and controllable by reporters and editors. So one of the current research projects in my lab is trying to explore these ideas of how to operationalize and parameterize news values in the context of news discovery. This project is called Algorithm Tips. You can visit it online at algorithmtips.org. And the idea of the site is to lower the cost for journalists to begin investigating algorithmic decision-making systems used in government. In addition to the examples and the resources that we curate on the site, we are also building a database of leads. which looks something like this. The way that we assemble this database is actually to use an automated monitoring apparatus that scrapes government documents every week using a search engine technique. And then we score and rank those documents using a machine learning model that we trained on these documents. We incorporate crowdsourcing feedback, and we also have an editor who checks everything over before it's published. In creating the information process, we thought pretty carefully about the news values that we were including and how they're implemented in the system. So for instance, the idea of topical relevance of these leads, this comes from the machine learned score. The idea of proximity is supported by automatically created metadata. But we also have dimensions like potential for controversy, which you can see there at the bottom, and things like number of people impacted, which are supported by our crowdsourcing process, which asks a number of people to rate the lead along these various newsworthiness dimensions. So all of this information is synthesized and can help support an expert journalist in making the final determination of whether they think something is worth pursuing. One other example of designing news values into tools is this prototype that Manju mentioned that I designed and developed while on sabbatical at the Washington Post in the fall of 2019. The underlying concept here relates to how and whether you can use AI to help detect newsworthiness in a data set. The design challenge was really about how to align the system we were building with journalistic conceptions of news values, which help inform how journalists choose items to turn into news stories. The premise of the tool is that we would provide a list of tip sheets on different variables that are being data mined from the US voter file. This is the large data set, including every registered voter in the United States, and includes millions of records, almost 200 million records. When you drill into one of the tip sheets, it looks like something like this, what I'm showing you here. The goal is to rank counties in the US according to state and according to the potential newsworthiness of that county along several dimensions. We want to help journalists identify places in the United States where they can go to do reporting. Now, keep in mind that we're not framing this as fully formed story ideas. There's a lot of additional reporting that needs to be done to turn these leads into real journalism. But the premise here is very much one of hybridization, where the algorithm is able to sift through these hundreds of millions of records to identify interesting patterns, and then the expert journalists can apply their own expertise in dialogue with the tool as they decide what is really worth their time and effort to pursue. Now, in terms of the news values, we tried to capture some notion of political relevance. So you can see this in the information design of the tip sheet. So we look at things like the party vote margin, the shift between 2012, 2016, and 2018, if there's an open congressional seat, if the county has flipped its support from party to party. We integrate some location context, like the population rate, whether it's an urban, suburban, or rural county. We have a link to additional census information and a link to the raw data if you want to see the underlying numbers there. And I should say that a major design effort here was to think through what data was available and then how to align things with news values and really how to make the tool valuable to journalists. And so we ended up doing a lot of user evaluation. And I think the really gratifying thing is that this tool was actually used and was able to help guide some journalists at the Post to important locations for their reporting. Whoops, sorry. In this case, some video journalists were drawn to do a report about Erie County, Pennsylvania, because the tool showed them that there was a particular low voter registration rate there, and also keyed them into things like the partisan swing from 2012 to 2016 to 2018. So both of the last couple of examples demonstrated how news values could be incorporated into tools, as well as how work could be hybridized between AI and humans. But in this example, let me also offer you something that gets a little bit more directly at this idea of hybridization of algorithms in humans. So this is an article that was produced by the RADAR project out of the United Kingdom. So RADAR is a project, it's a team of several data reporters and a couple of editors that produces on average about 8,000 local stories per month across the United Kingdom. Its stories are run by various local media outlets that subscribe to a wire service that it provides. And you're looking at, in the slides, at one example of an article that they generated. To produce these kinds of localized stories, RADAR uses freely available open government data sets that are tabulated by government area. So each reporter develops about 2 stories per week into data-driven templates, which include fragments of text and logical if-then-else rules for how to translate the data into location-specific text. The core structures of the stories might be somewhat similar across versions, but the details will be locally tailored. The data journalists are tasked with first finding out various angles and storylines for the data. So this is a fundamentally creative process. They do reporting to add kind of broad brushstrokes background information. They gather national context. And that reporting context is written into the template with that basic story structure. And then the automation is used as more of a production assistant to adapt some of the text in the templates to the local level. So automation is certainly working in collaboration here with people, but it's more as a lever for human effort, how to scale up human effort. RADAR uses this tool called ARIA Studio. I think it sort of gives you a hint at what hybridization looks like in practice. In reality, it's really just a more complex interface for word processing. You could think of it almost as an alien word processor that lets the author write fragments of text that are controlled by these data-driven if-then-else rules, along with some mathematical functions. And what I think is really interesting about this is that I think a lot of the advances that we've seen to date, particularly in industry, in terms of automated writing, are coming mostly as a result of what I see as essentially user interface innovations. So figuring out better ways, more effective ways to marry the expertise of journalists together with the capabilities of automation. So stepping back a little bit to look at this theme of hybridization, I think this example really kind of demonstrates how automation is used in concert with human effort. In the hybridization of work, more often than not, AI technologies, as I mentioned, actually end up creating new types of work related to updating, tweaking, validating, and maintaining these systems. A lot of this work will be relatively routine, such as making sure the data streams are updated or editing databases or spreadsheets to reflect new details. But we also need higher levels of labor here in terms of supervision and management of these systems. So automation editors are needed to assess the quality of the content produced, to be available to post corrections in case the automation doesn't behave as expected once it's in operation. Engineers may need to be involved in figuring out errors that crop up. Why was there an error? And how do I prevent this error or a similar error in the future? And as newsrooms expand their use of automation, I think we're also going to need strategists who will need to keep an eye on the big picture to know when to deploy, decommission, or redevelop a system as it adapts over time. In general, I think we'll see newsroom skills, tasks, and even jobs evolve with respect to automated content systems. And while I don't see automation leading to massive unemployment in journalism, I think it will nevertheless have implications for the labor force. But I think it's fair to say that many of the new roles emerging in this domain will need editorial thinking as much as they need a capacity to understand data and the capabilities of the state-of-the-art tools. Finally, I'll just add that I think there's a lot of really meaningful research to do in understanding the roles and tasks of journalists in these type of hybrid workflows, and to study the ways in which journalists and AI can effectively interact and collaborate. So in closing, I just want to remind everyone that I think, in my opinion, it really does ultimately come back to people. I think what animates algorithms and AI are the people who design, develop, operate, and manage these systems. And so I think the future of algorithmic media must be human-centered. So I'll end there. Thank you very much. My contact information is there, and I'd be happy to be in touch. Thanks so much. And happy to take questions now too.
Thank you, Nicholas, for the inspiring session. And our participants have flooded with questions, actually, for you. And our moderator, Nino Piki, shall moderate the question answer.
Fantastic, thanks.
Hello, sir.
Hi.
I'm Nino, and I'll be moderating the question answer session. So shall we begin?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Okay. So this is the first question. What are the basic courses that a journalism student should pursue to have a good fundamental understanding about computational journalism?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sort of like, how do you get into this? I think there's definitely a need to understand data literacy. I call it data thinking in my book, sort of how to understand the world through data. Because AI systems understand the world through data, I think to kind of get into this, you really need to understand how that impacts the way AI sees the world. Of course, there are advanced, data courses, data journalism, basic statistics, advanced statistics. For a number of years, I think people have been questioning, does every journalist need to know how to program or code? I would come down on the side of saying that not every journalist needs to know how to code, but I think even just taking an introductory programming course can go a long way to helping you understand, where could things go wrong, or how do I understand how this system is really kind of coming together and processing information. So I would generally encourage people to at least take an intro programming course. And there's plenty of ways to do this now. I mean, there's tons of free courses to learn R or Python, and you have like Coursera courses and so on, which are entire sequences to learn this material.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question. This is our next question. How would be artificial intelligence helpful for reshaping and rethinking serious and accountable journalism?
Yeah, I think that's also a really good question. I think what I've seen so far is that AI has been useful for scaling up and increasing the scope and the comprehensive and ultimately the quality of accountability journalism. So you see it deployed in a few cases now to help rank and score documents, to direct journalists' attention to documents that are more likely to be impactful or interesting for an investigation. So I certainly think we're already seeing that. And we're trying to also, I mentioned the algorithm tips project, which, by the way, everyone is welcome to use that database if you go to algorithmtips.org. So the algorithm tips, tries to use machine learning kind of at the front end of the funnel, if you will. So if we want more journalists to investigate algorithms in society, our goal is to make it easier for journalists to find out about those algorithms in government. So it's not the idea that a journalist already knows what they're investigating, or they already know what the story is going to be. It's more like, help me understand the world on this beat. You know, try to scope down that world to a narrower subset of leads that I may or may not pick up and investigate, but we certainly are hoping that we can stimulate journalists to investigate some of that material.
Thank you so much. Now we will move on to the third question of the session. I think this question is from India because it's evening here. The question is, can we apply the same approach to the advertising realm? For example, like programmatic advertising?
Yeah. Good evening as well. Good morning from where I am. I think that's interesting. You know, I think there are some startups out there that are thinking about how to apply automated content production more in the realm of advertising. You may have heard of some of the latest synthetic media tools like GPT-3. This is out of OpenAI. It's a very powerful language model that's been trained essentially on all of the internet. And there are some people who are experimenting with, can we generate advertising copy programmatically using a model like that to synthesize different copy for different people. I'm not aware of the results of that work yet. I think people have sort of just started trying out some of these things. And as I mentioned, there are some startups kind of playing in this space, but I think we'll see over time like how that evolves. I mean, I will say that it's a little bit scary, you know, when you think about starting to try and marry things like synthetic text generation or automatic text generation, advertising, and targeting on platforms like Facebook. So, you know, when we start to combine all those things, you can imagine a heavily personalized advertising environment, which, I mean, I suppose if you're interested in selling things, that could be a good thing. If you're interested in protecting a democracy, you might be a little bit more worried about the potential for these types of technologies to come together to manipulate people or to push on people's cognitive biases or cognitive weak points through kind of targeted, tailored messaging. You know, we'll see how that all plays out. But I just kind of, you know, I think in the book, I try to stay upbeat and positive about a lot of these technologies, particularly because I try to see it through the lens of professional journalism. And I think that within the value structure of professional journalism, it's easy to make that assumption that journalists have a strong ethical code. You know, they have some accountability to the public. And so the ways in which they use automation are in some sense constrained a bit. But once you get outside of that sort of professional journalism, you know, you look at advertising or, you know, politics, some of these same technologies can be used in ways that I think argue negative consequences of the technology. So I think it's important to be aware of that.
Okay, thank you, sir. So we will move on to the next question of the session. This is a very interesting question. Even I want to know the answer. Okay, so the question is, in the 2020 presidential election, what were the different AI tools used by the newsrooms to check false claims by the candidates and those by the media biased to any of the political parties?
What were the different AI tools used by the newsrooms to check false claims by the candidates and those by the media biased to any of the political parties? Okay, got it. So, right, I gave this example of Claimbuster from 2016. You know, fast forward to 2020, you know, there's been a lot of work in the last 4 years, really, around automated or AI-informed fact-checking tools. For the most part, AI is primarily used for what I would call fact spotting. So identifying claims that are potentially interesting to fact check, but not actually doing the fact check itself. There are some research systems that attempt to do actual fact checks, that is like to test the veracity or the validity, the veracity or the verification of an actual claim, but these are very limited. They're limited typically to straightforward sentences that are clearly grounded in data. Like, you know, if a politician claimed something like, in the state of Michigan, I created 50,000 new jobs. Maybe you could get an AI tool to fact check that because it's such a straightforward claim, and because there's a database somewhere of the number of new jobs that were created over some time span. So you can imagine having an AI tool check that. But for the most part, that's like, people don't speak in such straightforward terms. There's usually a lot more ambiguity in the way people speak. They are speaking in compound sentences with potentially multiple claims intermixed. Claims can change over time, so it's hard for an AI to know, well, is the candidate talking about a claim from today, from last week, over what period of time are they claiming this, and so on. And so I will say, like, AI for actually doing the fact check is pretty limited, but mostly AI now is being used to help identify claims that professional fact checkers could actually look at. I'm aware of one project out of Duke University that actually uses the Claimbuster API to scan CNN transcripts every day, and everything that anyone said on CNN every day, and they rank all of the claims, and then every morning they'll send out a newsletter basically to a dozen different newsrooms, and that newsletter sort of has a top ranking of like the top 10 or 15 claims made on the news channel. And then it's really up to the journalists at that point, whether or not they want to go ahead and check that. Another tool, I wouldn't necessarily call it an AI tool, but when I was at the Washington Post last year, they were building up a big database of all of the claims, all of the false claims that President Trump had made. And so, I think by sort of establishing a database like that, it can also make it faster and easier for human journalists to search through and sort through material and, like, for instance, find if, we've already fact checked something. So if you've already fact checked something, then this tool can quickly like match like a new claim to a previous claim that's already been fact checked. And so that can really accelerate the process. There are some other tools out there. I know Factful in the UK has been working on some live fact checking tools. So if you imagine something like a debate context where, it's happening in real time, we're trying to understand, what these candidates are saying, like right here, right now. And you can deploy AI in that context to make the human fact checkers faster. So to keep the human fact checkers like more tightly in the loop. So instead of it taking me 5 minutes to fact check something that the debater just said, maybe it only takes me 2 minutes because I can use an AI tool to search, and find like the most relevant previously fact-checked statements from that candidate. So we are seeing AI being used in a number of ways, but I think we'll continue to see it evolve. Personally, I'm a little bit pessimistic about AI that's ever going to be able to determine truth for us. I think that truth is hugely contextual, and I think that AI is oftentimes going to be missing the context that it needs in order to make a good evaluation, a faithful evaluation of the truth. And so I would strongly encourage sort of, again, this hybridization of using the AI tools to help human beings come to better truth determinations.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we will move on to the last question of the session.
Okay.
This is our last question. Mainstream medias are adopting the AI in the journalism domain, but a country like India and many third world countries, what will be the impact on the small and local news entities? Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, that's great. That's a really good question. This has come up, also in the U.S. context, but I appreciate also the Indian context, which I'm admittedly I'm not as familiar with. But I know in the U.S. there has been some interest in trying to figure out, what AI can do on the local level and for smaller news organizations. I mean, there's a couple of really big challenges there. One is that smaller local news organizations will tend to have less data resources, less ability to collect, manage, clean, and deal with data. And that's going to be a key limitation to being able to use AI. Sort of going hand in hand with that, I think there's the talent question. A lot of these tools, certainly if you're going to implement them from scratch, but also in some cases, just if you want to use them, you need to have a fairly high level of skills in data and in understanding these tools. And so, what I'm seeing in the US context is a lot of that skill, a lot of the people who are highly skilled are working in national media. They're working at the Washington Post, the New York Times, Bloomberg, Reuters, all these big, national and international companies. So, what does that do to the local news ecosystem? So, I mean, I think there's a couple of ways forward here. One is that I think we're seeing, again, sorry, I'm still just kind of speaking from what I know about the US context, but we're starting to see some foundations in the US step into that void to try to bridge those gaps. So the Knight Foundation has sponsored workshops to try to think through what AI can do for local media. The Brown Institute at Columbia University has now established a local news lab where they're thinking through some of these issues. At Northwestern, in the Medill School of Journalism, they have something called the Local News Initiative, where they're thinking about some of these issues. And what I think is happening there is we're seeing sort of academia step in to try to create that bridge, to try to develop tools that are designed for local media or smaller newsrooms, which may have gaps in data or computational literacy, and create those tools so that they can be used by those smaller organizations. And I think we're still in the early phases of that. I don't think we've seen that fully play out yet. But I'm trying to be optimistic here. I think it could end up being a good thing in the sense that there is investment in building these tools specifically to help local and smaller organizations. I think the real challenge will be to understand the adoption, whether or not those tools really actually kind of, and people take them up. And then just one other thought, I mentioned this example of Radar in the UK. I mean, I think that's an example of this. So, it's a small company. I think it's, still less than a dozen people, but they're producing thousands and thousands of local news stories that can help augment the local news ecosystem. I wouldn't say it's going to replace local news. I think it's going to augment local news with some of this data reporting. But I think we can also start to see the glimmer of hope that these tools can just improve coverage just a bit more, and try and increase the amount of local information that people have available to them. So maybe I'll leave it there on an optimistic note.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nicholas, for taking so much time to answer all the questions that we had. Now I'll hand over the session to Manju ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Diakopoulos, for your patience for answering the questions. And automation, algorithm, and AI here to augment the work that journalists do. It can make journalists more efficient. When journalists use new tools, it will enhance the quality of journalism processes. Thank you for the inspiring thoughts. This will certainly motivate young journalists and media students to acquire skill sets required to use these new technologies. Our sincere gratitude for joining this summit. On behalf of the participants, thank you very much for the great session. We look forward to having you for more sessions in future. Good luck for your endeavors in shaping the future of journalism. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And those were some fantastic questions.
Thank you.
Again.
Yeah.